Hello witches, welcome to Module 8 of Beginning a Witch's Apothecary, and I am Josie Hellebore, your instructor. This is our lesson on poultices. Now poultices are a paste that is made from either dried or fresh herbs and other powders such as Epsom salt, baking soda, bentonite clay is used sometimes, activated charcoal, and other kinds of minerals and dirts and powders that are good for drying out toxins or healing wounds. While many poultices are made from herbs and plants and barks and flowers and things from the plant kingdom, there's also some that are made in other parts of the world, say in Ireland and in Celtic traditions. There's some traditional recipes for poultices that include bread and milk. And you can find a myriad of recipes for those on Pinterest or a simple Google search. Today, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be making poultices out of herbs. You can use fresh or dried for both of these exercises. And I would recommend, if you are using dried, to go ahead and use more of the herbs. The dried herbs tend to break down a lot more, to be more compact, and you want to have more herbs to be able to absorb the water. We're also going to want to go ahead and start heating up our water. You don't need a lot of water for this. What I do is I just take a tea kettle and I fill it about 1/4 of the way and I set it to boil. And you're not going to use anywhere near that. We're probably only going to use 2, maybe 3 tablespoons of water per poultice tops. In fact, I'm going to start small and I'm going to go in and continue to add. And the reason being is because you want this to be a pasty substance. You want it to be a pasty substance so that in some cases, if you put it directly onto the skin, it's not going to run, it's not going to drip everywhere. And also, if you're going to make a poultice where you put inside a compress, which one of ours is going to be, you also don't want it to be so watery and runny that it seeps through. The idea is for it to be that paste-like consistency. So if you haven't started heating up your water, go ahead and do that now, and then we'll run through some of the other items that you're going to need for today's recipes. Let's start by going over the ingredients that you need for the first poultice that we're going to make, which is our rosemary and thyme poultice. For that, you're going to need, obviously, rosemary and thyme. I went ahead and wild harvested these from my herb garden. And I'm using a little bit more rosemary than I am thyme just because I have a larger rosemary plant than I do thyme. You might have the opposite situation or have more thyme readily available to you. Either one, you don't have to have it in exact proportions. It doesn't have to be evenly split. You can have a little bit of one more than the other. Totally up to you. I also have my thyme. Now again, these are fresh. You could use dried. I would highly recommend that if you are going to use dried, like I said, that you use more. Another thing that we're going to need specifically for this poultice is some baking soda. Now you're not going to need this much baking soda. In fact, the recipe only calls for 2 tablespoons. And as you're making it, you're going to kind of play it by ear if you want to add more powder or less. If you feel like you put a little bit too much water in there, you can always add some more baking soda. This isn't the only powder that we're going to have in our recipe, but I would suggest adding more baking soda rather than adding more activated charcoal if you feel like you've added too much water. And the reason being for that is activated charcoal is black, it stains, it gets everywhere. So if you have it and if you're trying to harden up a poultice paste that you feel like is overly runny, that's not going to be a substance that's going to absorb as much water as the baking soda is, and it's also going to create more of a mess. Totally up to you if you decide you want to use activated charcoal instead for that. Totally up to you, but you've been warned, it will stain your skin. That brings us to our next ingredient that we need, which is our activated charcoal. And we are also going to need a trusty tablespoon measurement. You really don't need a measuring cup for this unless you want to be really specific about your water, but I'm not going to use my measuring cup because it doesn't go low enough that it's going to be that little amount of water that we're going to use that even my measuring cup's lowest measurement, which is I think a 1/4 cup or 1/2 cup, is just way too much. I'm going to do a tablespoon at a time and maybe even 1/2 tablespoons. I'm just going to look and see at my mixture and how the paste looks. You're also going to want a bowl or a container, and this is what you're actually going to mix your ingredients in. Of course, you're going to want your trusty grinder. So you can grind up those herbs and goodies. I wouldn't suggest making your mixture in here. You totally can if you want to. You're just going to have all that residue you've got to clean out of your grinder. I typically try to limit my grinders to just herbs, flowers, plant materials, maybe resin and scents sometimes. I don't like to put a lot of any oils, certainly no waxes, anything that's going to permeate through this porous surface. And the next two items that you're going to need for this poultice and for the next one is you're going to want your wooden spoon for stirring. It doesn't have to be wooden. Like, as you know, I am partial to my wood burner inscribed wooden spoon. But whatever tool you want to use to be able to mix up the mixture. And then I suggest for the first poultice that you get some saran wrap. Since we're going to be applying this directly onto our skin, we want to have a way to keep it from excreting and dripping and getting everywhere. Yes, it is going to be a paste, but remember, we're going to have the activated charcoal that does stain. We certainly don't want any unnecessary stains on our clothing or on our furniture. So what we're going to start now with is let's just start breaking apart our herbs. I'm going to break these apart. I'm not going to use the stem for the rosemary just because it's not going to grind down how I want it to be formed into a paste. So I'm just going to start tearing off the little leaves of the rosemary, and you can do the same. Now, one thing I want to touch on with poultices is what all they can be used for. They can be used for a number of things, and a lot of those things are similar to what you can use salves for. They can remove toxins and suck out and draw out infections. They can heal wounds, burns, rashes, almost any kind of affliction on the skin, a poultice is good for. People use them on snake bites, burns, things like that. Bee stings, wasp stings, all of those things would be a great use of a poultice, a great reason to use a poultice. You can also use them to draw out congestion or open up the lungs or the nasal passages, and that's when you would want to use some of your more mentholated plants, maybe some eucalyptus, tea tree, even the mentholated succulent that I showed you in my herb garden that I grow. That would be a good one to use. And another popular use for poultices is to help with sprains and breaks. And believe it or not, something that you apply to the outside of your body, made from plants, can actually heal and help reduce inflammation and infection to internal wounds and injuries. The second poultice that we're going to make is going to be just for that purpose. The main ingredient is comfrey, and comfrey is most well known for its abilities to heal wounds such as sprains, breaks, fractures, torn ligaments, any kind of joint, muscle, bone pain, anything like that. Comfrey is great at healing. Now, if you do some research on comfrey, you're going to find that there's been a lot of recent research that's come out that suggests against ingesting it. And that's why in my herbal correspondences sheet, I was so adamant about you not ingesting it, and certainly not if you're pregnant, nursing, or planning to conceive. In fact, if you are any number of those, I would not even use the poultice on yourself, just because you don't want to run that risk. As far as ingesting internally, that goes for anyone, not just someone pregnant, nursing, or trying to conceive. There's been a lot of recent studies that have come out that says that it might be really bad for liver and just a number of things. I always research before I suggest herbs to people. So when I was getting everything together for this course and creating this curriculum, I looked really deeply into each one of the herbs that I suggested on my herbal correspondences sheet, and I read a bunch of articles about comfrey, which was really disconcerting, and disheartening. Now, I'm sure we could go through all kinds of plants and find downsides to them, but I do generally adhere to medical journals, and it's better to be safe than sorry. So again, if you're pregnant or nursing, don't use the second poultice. In fact, don't even mess with comfrey. Okay, so by this time, our water should be boiling, if not all the way boiled. So what I want you to go ahead and go do now, if you haven't already, is go pull your water off of the heat. We do want it hot, we do want it boiled, but we don't want to mix it together when it's boiled. Remember, we're going to put this directly on our skin. So go ahead, go pull your water off of the burner and come back here, and we will finish up tearing up our herbs so that we can begin grinding. Another thing that I want to talk about with the rosemary and thyme poultice that we're preparing right now is I want to talk about all of the things that you can use this poultice for specifically. Like everything we've created, it has both magical and medicinal correspondences and uses. So the medicinal properties of this specific poultice are that it is an antibacterial, an anti-inflammatory, and it can be used for wound and rash treatment. The magical properties include healing, protection, exorcism, and banishment. Now, you're probably wondering how you could use something like a poultice for medicinal and magical purposes at the same time. Well, that's pretty easy. So, say you get a snake bite. I hope that you don't, but let's say, for instance, for our purposes that you do. If you were to use this would not only aid in medicinally healing, but those magical healing properties would come into play. So you would have a spiritual side of healing accompanying that treatment. And you would also have the protection aspects that would come into play. So you would protect you from future harm or infections. Exorcism and banishment. So it's sucking out those toxins, right? So magically speaking, sucking out any kind of toxins, if there was any reason why that happened to you that isn't completely mundane, if maybe somebody was trying to work against you or hex you or anything of that nature, not only would you be treating the snake bite medicinally, but you could also be treating the spiritual aspect of that wound as well. All right, everyone, I'm just about pulling all of my little leaves off of these plants, and I've come up with a good amount of herbs, and I'm hoping that you did too. Now, I added measurements on the recipe sheet for this, and you can totally go by them. Those are just kind of to give you an idea of the amount that you want, and this is absolutely about 4 tablespoons, which is what I recommended. Let me hold it up here so you guys can see. It's a good amount of herbs. So now what we're going to do, take our trusty grinder and go ahead and a little bit at a time, we're going to grind. Now remember that when we're grinding, we want to just do like a little bit at a time. We don't want to fill this guy up. If we fill this guy up all the way, we're going to have a hard time grinding everything evenly. As you can see, I've decided to use my molcajete for this because, like I said before, it has those rough edges inside, and I really, really like how it grinds things like rosemary and any kind of fresh herbs. So just keep on grinding a little bit at a time. And this is kind of where we're trying to get with it. So it doesn't have to be broken up all the way. But we do want to make sure we're breaking open that plant, breaking it down in composition, and allowing those juices and those aromas to seep out. That's what contains the healing properties that we want. That's where the medicinal goodies is inside the plant. So just keep on a little bit at a time, grinding down your ingredients. I'm down to my last little pinch of rosemary and thyme that needs to be grounded down. Just making sure I get that real good. All right, and just add that to your mixture. And now what we want to do is we want to go ahead and take some of our hot water and put it in some kind of a bowl or container, something that you can easily scoop your tablespoons or half tablespoons out and pour it into. Like I said, it doesn't need to be the glass measuring cup. If you want to use it because it has a handle, by all means go ahead. Okay, so I've got my trusty hot water here. I've got it in a mug. It's a little bit smaller than the glass measuring cup, and I'm limited on space here, so I want to keep my working space as free as possible. I've got my dried ingredients ready. I've got my baking soda. I've got my activated charcoal, and I've got my teaspoon. So first, let's go ahead and start by taking a tablespoon of baking soda. I'm just gonna kind of level it off here. Now, our recipe actually calls for 2. I'm just gonna mix this up really nicely and just see how that looks so far. And break up any big chunks. So you'll sometimes will have these big chunks, you know, similar to this in your baking soda. Just break all that up. Just break all that up with your wooden spoon and mix it nicely. So next, let's go ahead and add in our tablespoon of activated charcoal before we get into more baking soda, okay? Looks like that's just about what I have here, which is perfect for me. Add that in and continue your mixing. Oh yeah, I definitely think it's going to be a good idea to go ahead and add in that extra tablespoon of baking soda. I think that that's going to be exactly where we're going to want to be. This is actually going to be a good amount of poultice. So you can store this in a jar in your refrigerator for a couple of days, but it won't stay too long. It's not going to be the type of thing that you can keep in there for weeks or months, but it will last for a couple of days. If you have something that you want to continuously treat over the course of 3 days or so, and you put it in a airtight container in the fridge so it keeps longer, you can definitely get away with doing that. But like I said, it's plant material and it doesn't have a preservative in it, so it will go bad. All right, so this is what mine looks like, and you can see that the activated charcoal is real prominent, right? So I think it was a good call to use more baking soda than activated charcoal. So now let's go ahead and add, let's go ahead and start with a tablespoon. I'm feeling a little brave here, just because I've got so much powder there. I'm gonna pour that in, and I'm gonna start to stir. Oh yeah, we can easily get away with putting more in there. There's a lot of dry powder still in my mixture. You can see that. There's whole pieces that haven't been touched at all by the water, and it's not really a paste yet, it's more just kind of some clumps. So let's go ahead and add 1 more tablespoon. All right. I think I probably should have maybe only done a little bit less than that. It's not super wet, but it's a little bit more wet than I want. So I'm gonna go back to my baking soda and add another tablespoon in. Add that in, stir it in, and that looks great. I think I found the magic consistency there. You see the difference? It stirs easily. Let me turn the angle of the camera so you guys can really see what I'm talking about here. All right, witches, I really want you guys to be able to see what this looks like as a paste. As you can see, it's not runny at all. It's very thick in consistency, but it's still moist, which is exactly what you want. You don't want it to be too dry. You want that moisture to maintain. In fact, in some natural remedy folklore, they say that if you use a poultice overnight and it's still slightly wet in the morning, then that means you've made an excellent poultice. All right, let's go ahead and apply. All right, friends, so before we just go ahead and start applying this to our skin, and you may or may not have a cut or a burn or a wound, but I'm just doing this for demonstrative purposes. I'm gonna go ahead and pre-prep by getting my cling wrap, my saran wrap ready. Okay. So I don't have a burn or an abrasion right here, but I'm just gonna pretend for the sake of our demonstration for you guys that I do. I wanna go ahead and get this positioned correctly. I'm gonna go ahead, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna place the saran wrap underneath my arm, see, like this, and that way when I place it on my arm, I can safely just wrap it over and conceal it. Some people even add an extra ace bandage around it. If you are gonna sleep in it, I would definitely recommend that because we tend to move around a lot as we sleep, and you wanna make that as clean as possible and prevent any kind of messes that you can. So this is so thick, I'm having to prop the bowl up against my arm. Okay. All right. Very nice consistency. Doesn't move at all. Just so you guys can see. Doesn't move at all. Go ahead and wrap it up. So I wrap that over, and then I'm going to continue all the way around. I did make a little mess right there, but that's okay. But as you can see, now the poultice is against the wound, it's against the skin, and it's got a protective barrier. And again, you can add another layer of saran wrap. It helps to have someone else do this for you. It's not the easiest thing to do one-handed. Can be done, but if you've got little ones, or if you have a spouse or something like that, and you can do this for them, or perhaps they can help you if the need be, and that'll be more advantageous. That's our first poultice. Okay, witches, it's time for poultice number 2. This poultice is the one I was referring to earlier that is perfect to use on breaks, sprains, hurt muscles, backs, things like that. It helps break down any kind of inflammation for internal wounds, breaks, tears, things of that nature. Now, you'll want the same amount of comfrey as you used rosemary and thyme. I don't have fresh comfrey right now. I have a ton of dried comfrey. So that's what I'm gonna use. So we're gonna do similar to the same thing. Just kind of break it down a little bit before we grind it. And so while we're doing that, we'll go ahead and talk about this poultice in a little bit more detail. The medicinal properties of this poultice are, as we mentioned, pain relief and reduction of inflammation in breaks, bruises, and sprains, etc. The magical properties of this poultice include increasing psychic abilities, protection, prophetic dreams, and even past life regression work. And I would even go as far as to say any kind of meditative work you're going to do, this would be good for. Again, you're probably wondering how you would incorporate a poultice that was for breaks or sprains magically, as well as medicinally. One way that you can incorporate this poultice magically with those properties is, I would imagine that if you were using this poultice for the medicinal purposes, break or sprain, you're probably in a vast amount of pain. That being said, although the poultice is going to provide you with some relief of the pain, there's also going to be that gnawing mental pain that's there too, right? And I would take a guess that you would really benefit from being able to disconnect from where you were physically. And you can do that by using your mental abilities and your psyche. So any kind of meditative state that you can put yourself into to take your mind off of the pain. Any kind of psychosomatic type of healing that you wanted to do to basically psych yourself out mentally that you were also not in this moment of physical pain with your break or your sprain or your fracture or your torn ligament or whatever the case may be. And so that's when you could really utilize both the medicinal and magical properties. Because this has such a strong connection with our mental side and our psyche and our psychic abilities, we can help aid in that relief. A lot of times with physical pain, a lot of it is mental. And that's why you hear about placebo effects working with medication sometimes, is because people psych themselves out that they're feeling more pain or less pain. A little bit of psychology there for you guys. Okay, so now we should have our herbs, our comfrey, fairly ground up. So let's go ahead and add that to our grinder and grind it up a little bit more. If you've used fresh herbs, fresh comfrey, then it might take you a little bit longer. That's okay. Just steady as she goes. Let's get this ground up. Doesn't have to be powder fine all the way. Something like this is perfect. Just like how we had the other ones. Go ahead and add it to your bowl, and let's get all of this stuff ground up. Psst, guys, I forgot to tell you, we need ginger for this one too. So sorry, I forgot to tell you that in addition to comfrey for this recipe, you'll be needing ginger. Now, you probably already knew that because it's in the PDF and it's also on your recipe sheet, but just wanted to go ahead and add that if you haven't gotten your ginger, go ahead and grab your ginger. You can also use powdered ginger. I'm going to use some of this dried root. It's semi-dry. It's not all the way dry. And I'm going to go ahead and cut it up into some little pieces. Put it in my grinder and add it to the mix. If you haven't gotten yours ready, go ahead and do that now. Okay friends, now you've got your comfrey and you've got your ginger together. Now remember, your ginger doesn't have to be ground up all the way, because this poultice we're not going to put directly under our skin. We're going to have it inside of a compress, so it's okay if it's bigger and chunkier, okay? All right, let's go ahead and get started. First, we're going to add our dry ingredients, 2 tablespoons of Epsom salt. In addition to my Epsom salt, I've also still got my baking soda on hand, and I've got this on hand because it's really, really great at creating a paste consistency. So if I'm not able to achieve that simply with the Epsom salt and the herbs, then I'm gonna call in and utilize some baking soda. Okay, so I added my 2 tablespoons of that in there. Kind of go ahead and start mixing just like you did with the other one. Now, just because we're putting this in a compress doesn't mean we don't want it to be a paste-like consistency. We absolutely 100% do. Okay, so let's start with 1 tablespoon of our hot water. Put that in there and see what happens. So far, so good. And learning a little bit of lesson from last time, when I add more water, I'm not going to add a full tablespoon. I am just going to add a half and see what that does for us. The consistency is pretty nice. I wouldn't quite say that it's a paste yet, so definitely want to add a little bit more water. Let's try to do that half a tablespoon and see what happens. About half a tablespoon. Not too bad. Could probably use just a little bit more water, just the tiniest bit more water. And I think I might go ahead and add some baking soda just so we can get more of a paste Let's do that first. So just gonna add in a little bit of baking soda here, a little tablespoon, give that a nice stir. Break up those big chunks like we did before. I definitely think this is really gonna help give us more of a paste-like presence here. I do think we still, we needed more water before, and now we definitely do. Again, gonna stay with those smaller measurements because I don't want to overdo it. So you can see the consistency now. It is more pasty, could be a little more wet though, right? So let's just do a little half tablespoon and see what that does for us. It's a little bit over. I still feel like we could be just a little more wet, so just another little half a tablespoon. I think that the fact that I used dried comfrey is having a big factor in my ability to get this moist and pasty. Now that's perfect. Nice and pasty. So now what we're gonna go ahead and do, we're gonna place this inside the compress. For my compress, I simply used a good sized piece of cheesecloth. Now, the more I unfold it, the bigger the holes get, so I wanted this to be pretty well folded. In fact, I'm gonna go ahead and double layer it. I had this here just in case. I'm gonna go ahead and add that. So as you can see, I've kind of got it pretty well double layered, and then the outer piece is big enough to where I can close this up. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to put my mixture in the middle. I'm gonna close up my sides, and I'm gonna secure them. I'm gonna secure them, and then we will have a nice compressed poultice. Because it's the most practical and readily available thing that I have, I'm gonna use a brand new, it's not used and dirty. I'm gonna use a hair tie to secure mine. You can use jute cord if you want, or macrame or anything like that. Just know that it's gonna be a little bit more difficult to tie that around. Rubber band's gonna be super, super easy. Some of my dried comfrey got on the outside of my cheesecloth, but that's okay. All right, so let's go ahead and disperse our poultice into the compress. I'm just gonna pour all of this bad boy in there. A little close-up for you of the consistency here. Nice and pasty. Okay, now I'm gonna go ahead and tie it up one corner at a time. I'm gonna fold up opposite corner, opposite corner, opposite corner, until I have like a little sachet. And remember this technique because you're gonna wanna use it for our next well, it's not our next exercise, but another exercise in this module when we do herb baths. Okay, perfect. And you can see our mixture starting to seep through. So now you just place that directly on the skin. This would be something that you would, say you sprained your ankle and you could elevate your ankle and just place this on top of it. And just allow those oils and those essences and constituents and all that herbal goodies to heal your break or sprain or whatever injury that you had sustained inside of your body. This is one of the most ancient natural remedies there is out there in herbalism, and it's used all over cultures, all over the world. And there's a myriad of ways that you can make them and things that you can put in them. And so what my challenge is to you is to see what kind of recipes you can come up with. Do some research, start journaling and writing down what you find, and start experimenting. If you find 3 different recipes for poultices online that you like, why not try to do a combination of those? Just check it out, take the best things that you like from each of them and mix and match. Also, all about adapting and overcoming. If you don't have everything that one recipe calls for, check and see about another one, and use what you have. Use what you have and use your imagination and your creativity. And this concludes Module 8 on poultices.